Welcome to False Market Value, a podcast featuring real-world analysis of fictional sponsorships from movies, TV, books, music, and other pop culture. I'm your host, Ross Kennerly, founder of Quant Sponsorship Consulting in Las Vegas. This episode is produced by DJ Cruiser from KSD Studios in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Making his second appearance on False Market Value today is my friend, colleague, resident False Market Value golf expert, number 25 in your program, but number one in our hearts, Joe Canfield, founder and CEO of Fairways Relationship Management and Director of Affinity Partnerships for the University of Utah. Joe, welcome to the Second Timers Club.
Oh, man, that was a hell of an intro, Ross. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
That was awesome. it's fun to be back.
Welcome back. So, Joe, you and I did 10 Cup, and I can't believe this, but it's been like 7 months since we did 10 Cup.
Yeah.
Honestly, huge response to that one. It's one of the most listened episodes we had. I guess I didn't realize how popular 10 Cup was at the time. And I know we sort of...
It's a great show.
We debated on, do we do 10 Cup first or do we do this film? And as it turns out, we're doing both. So welcome back. Looking forward to this one.
Might as well.
So my recollection of this film was the summer of 1995. And it wasn't. It was the summer of 1996. So I looked it up before we started recording, and I thought, I know 10 Cup was 96 too, so how many golf films actually came out in 1996? So was that just a thing? And there were only two. It's Happy Gilmore.
It was the only
and
two.
10 Cup.
And they're both hits.
Yeah, and they both are about, problem child professional golfers that disrupt what pro golf looks like, which then actually happens that exact same year.
Actually happened. That's all.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. It's the Matrix, Ross. Red pill or blue pill? What do you want?
Great reference. Well, we have quite a bit to go through in a short amount of time. You and I have both seen this. I think most people have seen this film like 25 times. I mean, it used to run on TNT every weekend, 3 or 4 times. I mean, this is a popular one for sure. I mean, who hasn't seen Happy Gilmore at this point, right?
Yep, I was telling DJ when we jumped on, I've probably seen it 1,000 times, and then I rewatched it like a week ago just through the sponsorship lens, and I was like, oh, I'm watching this movie all over again. This is great. I love it.
All of a sudden, there's all this new stuff, and then the other stuff that I'm not paying attention on the comedic side, I start laughing about that I haven't laughed at ever, I think. But the sponsorship elements themselves are pretty funny. There's a few things here I was going to touch on, but
yeah, I'm excited to jump into it. And I mean, it combines the two things I love most in life, hockey and golf. So there we go. This is just perfect.
Beautiful. So we went in a lot into the background of Fairways and your work at the University of Utah in 10 Cup when we did that one. Do you want to just recap what your experience is, and then we'll jump in here?
Yeah, sure. You mentioned it. I'm director of affinity partnerships at the University of Utah, which is a fancy word for I manage our big corporate partners at the university that are kind of campus wide. Touch on athletics, do a lot of stuff with campus. So a ton of sponsorship material or experience there. Been there for going on 8 years now doing that, which is a lot of fun. Office has changed a lot. Job has changed a lot. Some of the NIL stuff that just happened with the NCAA has changed that a lot. Who knows what it's going to look like in 6 months?
Relates to this discussion too now.
That's been fun. Yep, we're living in that world right now, which is crazy. But then on the other side of things, coaching golf, teaching people how to use golf for business, and that's been a lot of fun. And since we chatted, that's taken off a lot too. Started getting involved with some tournaments and some other things like that, which has been really cool. So.
It's amazing.
It's an exciting time.
Yeah, it's an amazing business model that you have with here. So the NIL, piece that you just mentioned is going to be interesting to discuss as it relates to how the sponsorship would be done now, because there's an actual real life counterpart that we can talk about as part of this, which I'm excited to discuss. And going back to just sort of how your experience and expertise working with golf, we created a special category just for you.
Sweet.
That I haven't told you about as sort of a surprise. We'll save it to the end. But anyway, I'm excited to have you back on the program, Joe. Thanks again for doing this with me. So the year is 1996. As we discussed, the sponsorship is Subway's sponsorship of the fictional problem child professional golfer, Happy Gilmore. The film is Happy Gilmore, and this is False Market Value. Damn it, you people. This is golf, not a rock concert. So when we were exchanging texts preparing for this one, you had mentioned some of the research you had done into the background of when they were actually scripting this.
Yeah.
When Adam Sandler was developing the script with, I'm presuming, what is now the Happy Madison staff writers when they were putting this film together, and that there's some background there. And I wanted to let you touch on that. The one thing that stood out to me when I watched this for the, like you said, 1,000th time, just paying attention to the sponsorship elements, is where is Waterbury? And I started digging around trying to find where Waterbury actually is, because, when you're doing a valuation, you want to know what location the sponsorship is actually going to be in for especially the on-site elements when they're on the course. And I couldn't figure out where this was supposed to be. This entire movie was filmed in British Columbia, and there's a couple of things I'm going to touch on, but I didn't realize that. And then it's filmed in the same location as 50 other films listed on IMDb that have all been filmed in the same area in British Columbia, including a TV series that I love called Psych that features at least 2 of the actors from this film. Yeah. So there's a lot of history to the area where this was filmed, but it was really tough to nail down exactly where Waterbury is supposed to be in the US. But that was the one thing that stood out to me this time, because I know you'd done a lot of research into the golf elements of it, but I was thinking, like, okay, so where was the Waterbury Open actually held? And I still have no idea where it's supposed to be. I think it's like Pacific Northwest or California or something. But anyway, I'll let you kind of go. What did you find out digging into this?
My gut with where Waterbury's at is somewhere in Connecticut, just with all the ties to Boston. He's always wearing a Boston Bruins jersey. He says his dad loves hockey, which at that time makes it feel not like it would be in the West, because hockey in the West wasn't really that big of a deal. You had the Kings, you had, Vancouver, but I would say Waterbury is somewhere Connecticut.
Waterbury, Connecticut. Okay. Well, I guess this is skipping ahead, but this is one of my questions for you is, so who is Happy Gilmore a fan of? Who does he follow? Because in his apartment, he has banners for the Hartford Whalers, the Chicago Blackhawks, and then he wears Boston Bruins. He wears a Bees hat while he's golfing through the whole movie. So that was my thing, is, can you be a fan of the Blackhawks and the Bruins? I don't think you can do both. Is he just hockey that much?
I think he's a diehard. Yeah, I think he's just a diehard hockey guy, and then the Bruins are his team, but he's just a hockey guy, because when at the first of the film, when the lady comes out, she's wearing what looks to be like a New York Rangers jersey. Yeah.
Well, and
so I bet there's some inside jokes going on there with the writers on some of that stuff with where the teams are represented and things like that. But I have to say, Happy's a diehard Boston guy.
Well, as it relates to wearing the Bruins jersey on the golf course, they kind of tease in the movie that that's part of what makes him Happy Gilmore and the bad boy of golf, is that he just doesn't know how to dress on the golf course. And he even makes a joke about it where, he said, if I had to wear something like that, I'd kick my own ass. But exactly. So he's wearing his Bruins jersey on the course throughout the movie. But now in 2024, there's a professional golfer that's actually doing that. Can you give a little background on who that is and how that came to be? Because that's an awesome story.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was so the guy's name's Jake Knapp, Knapp, and he's kind of an up and coming guy, rookie on the PGA Tour this year. Won the Mexico Open, I believe it was, and then he finished in second in another tournament later. But he hits the ball. He drives it like 370. So like in a way he is Happy Gilmore. Like he's just killing it further than anybody else. But it's an interesting story, because just a couple of years ago he was trying to get through Q school, and I know we covered a lot of this kind of in our last episode about how hard of a process that is and how expensive it could be. But he got funding from the team president of the Anaheim Ducks, and the way it all came about was the president, and his name's escaping me, I should have written it down, but I didn't, but he's a member at Jake Knapp's home club where his parents are members, and he's out there playing 9 holes, and they happen to get paired together, and Jake has no idea who this guy is, right? And he just plays 9 holes, and he's kind of talking to him like, yeah, I'm trying to make it on the tour and whatever. At the end of the 9 holes, he hands him his card and says, hey, if you ever need anything, you let me know. Like, I'm happy to help you out. And that's where the sponsorship came from. And so he wears an Anaheim Ducks logo on his sleeve in every tournament. And when he earned his PGA Tour card on the Korn Ferry Tour, they did the big photo shoot and everything, and he's wearing a Ducks jersey that said PGA bound on the back or tour bound on the back.
Yeah.
And he's, drinking out of the cup that he'd won wearing the Ducks jersey. Like, it was like a Stanley Cup championship celebration. Like, it was really cool to see. And then going back and figuring out like, okay, where did that sponsorship actually come from? And it was just like, hey, I played 9 holes with this guy, presented myself well. He liked me. And now we are where we are. Like, it's really cool.
Yeah. And a rare example of a cross pro sports sponsorship where a team from one professional sports league sponsors an athlete from another professional sports league. And it sounds like there's been other examples of that, right? You said there was some MLB.
Yeah. So the MLB sponsors a couple of golfers, and the origin of that is, I can't remember which golfer it was. I'm looking at it right now. Cam Young is the one that wears it right now. But the origin of it was a guy's son was a professional golfer, and Rob Manfred, the commissioner of the MLB, was a member at the guy's club.
Yeah.
And the deal was we'll trade tickets for tickets. And so these players that are repping MLB logos on their jerseys, Cam Young was on a podcast and talking about it, and he's like, I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently I can get baseball tickets to any baseball park I want to go to. I just pick up the phone and call my agent, and he figures it out for me. But there's a crossover between baseball fans and golf fans, which makes a whole lot of sense. I think the crossover with hockey and golf is a little bit different, where when you look at everybody can play golf, right? There's people who do it. A lot of pro athletes love it. And hockey players, like the joke when you lose in the Stanley Cup playoffs is get the golf clubs out. So like hockey players, like the off season is all about golf. That's all they do. And coaching, when I hear someone played hockey over baseball, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much easier because hockey players are just naturally good at golf, which is interesting. But so I don't know. It's an interesting sponsorship, and it's funny that, Happy Gilmore in '96, he's actually wearing the full on jersey, playing tournaments in it. And I don't know if we'll ever get to that point, but it would be fun to see.
So this is jumping ahead, but while we're talking about it, do the mechanics of a slap shot translate well to driving in golf? Because he can't. So Happy Gilmore in the film can't skate at all, and that's one of the first things they're talking about is like, not a strong skater. I can't remember what other criticisms they have of him, but then his slap shot misses the net and goes through the dashboard and shatters it, and they're like, oh man, what a shot. And then when he steps out and grabs a golf club for the first time, he drives it 400 yards and knocks away on the second foot. But he just seems to sort of naturally slide into golf, and is joking about that in the film, where I'm a hockey player, I'm not a golfer, and he says that over and over and over again all the way until the end. Julie Bowen's character makes some jokes about that. But so it sounds like from what you said, and I am an amateur golf player. I've shared that when we did 10 Cup, but I don't play hockey at all. And I can't skate to save my life, which is ironic because I grew up in Northern Michigan and everybody up there can skate and play hockey except me, which is, funny in itself. But I have no frame of reference for that. Can you take what you learn from knocking a hockey puck into a net and then translate into knocking a ball off a tee? It just seems like those are different mechanics, but what you just said is it translates. Yeah.
It's all the same. Slap shot, you create that lag, and to have a powerful golf swing, you got a lot of lag, and so you're pulling really, really hard. So and then a slap shot, if you watch one slowly, you'll hit the ice before you hit the puck.
Okay.
And that piece is different in golf, but the same swing happens, right? You change the ball position and it all works, which is fun to see. You'll see golfers. I mean, there's some hockey guys out there that just rip the ball.
Yeah.
That's one of the more believable things about this movie is how far he can hit a drive.
Okay. Well, that's plausible.
It's funny because the original script, and you mentioned it in the intro here, they had Happy Gilmore winning the Masters.
Okay.
And they had had him winning a green jacket, and they're like completely just ripping on the USGA in the original script.
Okay.
So they had to bring it was a professional golfer they brought in to be the consultant on it, and it was a guy that nobody's ever really heard of. So Mark Lai, I think he won like one tournament in his whole career. He played on the Champions Tour, did pretty well there, but he came in and consulted on it and said, "Hey, you guys, you can't desecrate Augusta National. Like, first of all, it's way unbelievable. Let's have Happy win a fictional tournament." Which I remember watching this as a kid, and I was like, how does he go from winning some random Waterbury Open to being on the PGA Tour? Which I'm learning isn't as rare as you would think. So a lot of states will have an Open. So like out here in Utah, we have the Utah Open, and the winner of that will get an exemption into a professional tournament. And so that makes a lot of sense. But, and so I watched it again with that lens on. I was like, okay, it's way more believable that would actually happen now. Cause I remember watching this, 10, 15 years ago, and I was like, he just won like the local amateur. How is he getting on the tour?
Okay. Yeah. That was one of my questions too. So, for those of you who haven't listened to Tin Cup, I recommend you go listen to that, because Joe gives a very detailed breakdown on, first of all, like you just referenced, Joe, how hard it is to become a professional golfer, what that margin of error is, and, getting that extra 1%. We talk about that in that episode, but you give a very detailed breakdown of what a golfer has to go through from amateur playing in its first tournament all the way through becoming getting on the pro tour, what that looks like, and then how sponsors can be a part of that. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to Tin Cup, go listen to that. We're not going to, rehash any of that here, like you said, Joe, but that was one of the questions I had too is, can you just walk on with a great drive and then land a spot on the tour in one event going from 0 to nothing? Julie Bowen makes a joke later on in the film where he keeps saying he's a hockey player, and she's like, really, for what team? And he's like, easy. But,
easy, yeah.
And he goes from like an obscure, junior hockey player to on the pro golf tour in one move, just because he has one good tournament. That was a question I had for you: is that plausible? But it sounds like you can do it.
It is. I mean, it's unplausible. Obviously, you got to put a lot of work in to get to the point to even be in a position to play in that type of tournament, to have the opportunity to play at the PGA. Like, I mean, it's going to take some work to get to that point.
But until you're playing in the Tour Championship to say, I'm going to go learn how to play golf. You wouldn't wait.
I'm going to go learn how to putt. Yeah, exactly. That's the unbelievable part, that he could actually win a tournament and not be able to hit a shot inside 100 yards, because that's where all your scoring happens when you're playing golf.
Yeah. Well, that's how I golf too. I can drive, and that's about it. I can't putt. I have no short game, so my golf game is close to Happy Gilmore.
Yeah.
So that part's plausible. Well, yeah, it's interesting that those elements are in the original script, because I always note when we do these that a lot of these are paid product placements, and when you watch the end credits, they'll usually tag somewhere in the end credits if there was any sort of promotional consideration given for the film. And in this case, the only company that's tagged is a special effects company that's most famous for working on the early Star Trek series. That's the only one that gets a tag, but there are brands all over this movie. Yeah. And you had mentioned that there was some in some of the research you did, that there was some pushback around 96 about Subway's recognition of that, which is why, first of all, the when you posted that on LinkedIn showing Jake Knapp with a hockey jersey on the golf course, the first thing I thought was like, we got to do Happy Gilmore after this. It's perfect, and the Masters are over now this year, but it seemed like the timing was right to do this one. But the other part of that is, knowing your audience, and it's something that we've talked about on this podcast before, is, who is the audience for the sponsors that are recognized, not only in this film, but the brands that are recognized in just a property like this in general, not necessarily an entertainment property, but something revolves around the game of golf. And they make references that we'll talk to as we go through here. But the knowing your audience piece of where professional golf was in 1996 pre-Tiger, and then post-Tiger, how that changed it, which is the real life analog, where there was someone that came through in a sport that was begging for disruption and did it in the same year that the two films that we're talking about came out. And that really has a pretty interesting, I guess in retrospect, it adds a different layer to watching Happy Gilmore now when you're looking at it from the brand lens. And it seems like that audience alignment as it relates to both Subway and some of the other brands in there, it's interesting to see who was in the film this time, and that there was any sort of negative reaction to Subway, because I would argue that there are other brands that have way more recognition than Subway, although Subway has some key moments in it. But that to me, when you said that, when we were preparing for this, that fascinates me. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I was reading was a lot of people were like, we just went and sat through a commercial for Subway. And they were like frustrated that they went to a movie and then all they were hit with was sponsorship and logo placement. And they felt like it was the studios just making a movie to make some money and have a money grab of it, because it doesn't feel as natural as the other ones. Like Top Flight's in there a ton, and like Vern Lundquist is in there, which I think is hilarious. I love that Vern Lundquist is in the movie and he's the announcer. But then Lee Trevino shows up, which is so funny that Lee Trevino's in it, but he's wearing a Top Flight hat, and he's got his Cadillac. He's got his Cadillac, which I'm sure he had sponsors from in real life at the time. Probably not Top Flight, but Cadillac's more believable. But yeah, I mean, Top Flight's everywhere. TaylorMade I saw everywhere. Volkswagen shows up with not necessarily as a sponsorship, but it's something that's thrown in the movie that's memorable.
That hits the TV tower, right? At the end, it's a Beetle.
That's hit. Spoiler alert, Ross. But I mean, I guess if you haven't watched the movie at this point, that's kind of on you.
If you haven't watched the movie 28 years later, I think spoiler alerts are unnecessary. But there are, in addition to those, and we'll get into this when we go into the brands, but there's 5 title sponsors for 5 of the tournaments that are part of the tournaments that are presented in the film that Happy plays at. There are 5 title sponsors that are recognized all over those that get, frankly, I think longer exposure in the film than Subway does. Their recognition isn't that long. It's just more noticeable. And like you said, it's a little bit inorganic compared to how the other brands are worked into the film, especially the golf brands. Those don't seem out of place at all, even for 1996. But some of the other brands, I think, have, I would argue, like I said earlier, more prominent recognition. It's just more organic, so you don't notice them as much as you do Subway, even though Subway has less time. So I think the question is it more, does that make the Subway placement more effective or less effective? Because that seemed to be the one that people had a bad reaction to, was Subway.
Right. I think they made the Subway feels more like it's part of the storyline, right? Like he needed to have that sponsorship to get Grandma's house back. He didn't have enough money. He'd just been suspended from the tour, wasn't going to make any money. And so that felt way more organic. And it wasn't until the tour championship that he has the Subway bag. He's wearing the Subway hat. His caddy's wearing the Subway hat. So it wasn't until the very last tournament. And like, if you look back at it and you try to count how many giant checks he has in his car, he probably played in, 15 tournaments, 20 tournaments.
Yep. And I tried to capture the ones I could find, because you can't see all of the brands that are on those checks in his car, but you can at least see a few of them. And then the alligator that bit Chubb's hand off is at an Everglades Open that's presented. So let's go into our first category and start to dive into those a little bit. And then we're going to come back to Subway. But let's do Dave Elmy's Logo Stew. Named for ADC partners Dave Elmy, who coined the term Logo Stew when we did Talladega Nights a few months ago. So here's what I had, and you noted a couple of these, especially the golf brands.
Yeah.
So I had some of those too. I'll note some that I noticed that weren't there, but just starting with the real brands. And so the easiest way to do this, and I'll admit, when I first had the idea to do this, the only one I thought of that would be worth talking about is Subway.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to it a couple people, including you, and everyone has a different take on where the sponsorship exists in the movie, because a couple people said, oh, well, then there's all those tour sponsors too. And I didn't remember a single one of them. And I've seen this 1,000 times. And then I put my sponsorship hat on and I realized the easiest way to break down the real brands in the movie and the real sponsors was to start putting them into categories, like when you do an actual valuation. So who's here? What's their category? What is their level, if you want to call it that? So I started with the fictional PGT. So these are what I think are the tour sponsors. So O'Doul's, Subway, which I have a question about that. So Subway has a banner on the TV tower, and it shows up in a couple of different places. Now, we can get into why I think that is, but I would say, at least in the context of the fictional film, Subway has some sort of engagement with the PGT tour. ESPN is pretty prominently recognized. Golf Digest is there. You mentioned Top Flight, Golf Channel. And then I saw Wilson, and there was one scene where I think Reebok was in there, and those were the tour sponsors. And then the title sponsors, the main one, and there's actually a character in the end credits where AT&T is worked into the name of his character. It's the AT&T something. Yeah. So that's where, when I'm talking about product placement, that has to be a paid engagement, because in the script, it's AT&T, so-and-so as the name of the character that, this background or extra is playing. Yeah. But the AT&T Invitational is the first big tournament they show, aside from the Waterbury Open, which, by the way, has no sponsors. The Michelob Invitational, the Visa Everglades Open, that's the one with the alligator that bit off Chubb's hands. The one-eyed alligator. Chubb's hand, Bell Atlantic, but I don't know what tournament that was, but it was one of the ones prior to the home foreclosure and sale when he's going through his initial run. And then the Pepsi Pro-Am, which the Pepsi Pro-Am, the way they're activating on site, and I don't know if you noticed this, but on the tee boxes, they had incorporated the Pepsi logo into that. I don't know if Pepsi actually does that, but that...
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, like, you look at like the Waste Management Open down in Phoenix, the tee markers there are little garbage trucks. Which is awesome. This week it's the Canadian Open, the RBC Canadian Open. The tee markers are goalie masks, hockey goalie masks, which is awesome.
So player sponsorships, you mentioned Lee Trevino. I'm assuming Cadillac was one of his sponsors at the time. Yeah. Shooter McGavin has Buick on his shirt, but he doesn't have a bag sponsor. It just has his own name on the bag sponsor, which seems to fit the character. That it would just be the Shooter McGavin bag. And then Happy obviously has Subway, which is the one we're going to break down here. But those are the player sponsors that I saw. There weren't really... So Kevin Nealon's golfer, which is in the AT&T Invitational, that is paired up with Happy initially. He doesn't have any brands or on anything. I don't even think on his visor. And then there are these random product placements that come up. I mentioned AT&T, which is actually written into a name of a character in the script, but Budweiser is what Happy is shooting at with the nail gun early on. And so Budweiser pops up in a couple different places. Pepsi obviously pops up in a couple different places. Subway, which I'll get to the reasoning behind why I think that's a paid placement in addition to a fictional sponsorship. But then Red Lobster and Sizzler mentioned a couple times, which, Sizzler pops up and White Men Can't Jump Too, which we did a couple episodes back. Yeah. I don't know what's the deal was with Sizzler in the 90s, but it seemed like Sizzler was trying to get recognition.
This was like the height, like 96. It was like the height of like the paid ad placement in pop culture, because I think it all started with like the Ninja Turtles video game and Pizza Hut, right? And that was all around the same time. And so you said that they weren't recognized in the credits. So I wonder if it was just like such a new thing that people didn't like even think like, hey, I need to put this in the credits, that this was a paid promotion. Like I mean, think about it. That was almost 30 years ago. Makes me feel
not just, there were only a few brands and there were a whole bunch that were missing. There were no brands. There was no promotional consideration paid by, but these are clearly paid promotional brand.
I didn't even know that existed until you told me when we were talking about Tin Cup. And so I actually stuck around to watch the credits looking specifically for that. I was like, it's not there. What the heck?
So did I. I did the same thing. There has to be something here recognizing all these brands are in the movie, but there isn't any recognition there. It's fascinating. We did the pro sports teams. So this is one I wanted to mention. So we'll get into the fake brands too. And I thought this was a fake brand. I don't know if you noticed at the very beginning. So the professional golfer that's his dad's favorite, the Terry O'Reilly that they call the Tasmanian Devil.
The hockey player. Yeah, Terry O'Reilly, the Tasmanian Devil.
Who I think is the hockey player that actually kills Happy's dad in that scene. I think that's a Tasmanian Devil. Like,
it took me like 20 years to figure out that's actually what happened.
So Terry O'Reilly they're just at some random hockey event, and it's on, 25 millimeter film, that very beginning intro sort of, background montage into who Happy Gilmore is. But the team that he plays in is playing in an arena, and there's a scene where he skates out onto the ice, and there's a logo in the background on a dashboard sign that said Atrium Inn. So I started researching Atrium Inn because it said it was the official hotel of the Voodoo. And so the Vancouver Voodoo, where they filmed the movie, was an inline hockey team. And while there's no mention of this, they had to have played inside the Vancouver Voodoo, which actually folded in 1996. The team folded, but their official sponsor was Atrium Inn. So the Atrium Inn is real, and the Voodoo are real, which sort of surprised me. I didn't expect that in terms of professional teams. But I thought that was you
watch one of those hockey scenes at the first of the movie, and if you look closely enough, you can tell it's roller hockey and not actual ice hockey, which is really, really funny. And then Terry O'Reilly was actually a player for the Boston Bruins, which again leads me to believe that this is supposed to be like Boston, that area. And he was the guy who's out there fighting. He was, Broad Street Bullies time, like 1970s, like that's who he was, which is funny that he's a real hockey player. And the other thing, speaking of real hockey players, is in the scene where he's trying out for the team, Vinny Lecavalier, who's won a couple of Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, is actually one of the guys standing next to the coaches.
Which, that team that he's on, those are real jerseys.
Yeah. It's really funny to me that there's so much like detail in the movie around those types of things. And then there's other things that you're like, what the heck is that? Like some of the golf shot scenes, it's like you can tell it's the same shot over and over and over again, even though it's supposed to be a different courses.
Well, yeah, it's like they filmed at the same two courses and they just dressed the sets differently. Yeah, it's really bizarre. But then there's very specific things like so that was the Surrey Minor Hockey Association, and there was a Reddit thread that I was reading with people that are from Vancouver, and they said, is that actually Adam Sandler wearing a Surrey Minor jersey in the film? And they said, oh yeah, that's really in the film. So that scene
when you're on the junior
that
team,
has so getting into the fake brand. So he's playing for the Waterbury Wolverines, but that's actually Surrey Minor from Vancouver, which is crazy that was a real team. I never noticed that before until we did this. So yeah, they get all those details right, especially for the hockey stuff, and then some of the golf stuff they miss, and we'll get into the swing and a missed opportunity section. But the only other ones I was going to know, just for fake brands, there weren't a whole lot in this because, frankly, there were more real brands in this movie than there were, the typical fake ones you'd see, like in Tin Cup, where all of his sponsors were fake, with the exception of some of the ones that were on the actual, pro tour events that he was in. All of the sponsors they just made up, and that was in the script, but not in Happy Gilmore. It's all real brands, and then there's a couple fake ones, like so Mosley Price and Associates was the, I think, general contractor where he worked, where he shot his boss in the head with a nail gun. Jesse's moving company was when they were repossessing all of his grandma's material, and they moved her out of the or they moved all of her furniture out of the house. That was Jesse's movie company. That's the scene where he first learns to basically drive. Happyland Mini Golf. So that's a real place, just with a fake name. It was Playland Amusement Park, and that's also in Vancouver. And then there's a beer that's actually listed. So if you go online, there's a list of all the fictional beers that show up in film, and the bottle that Happy breaks, even though Budweiser's clear product placement, is Tuttle's beer, and that's fake. So it's a Tuttle's beer bottle that he smashes. So, he can get in a fight with Shooter McGavin, or threatens to anyway. So those are the only ones that really popped up. And then things like Quebec Manor Hotel is fake. The Waterbury Wolverines we touched on. And then the Waterbury Open, I mean, no sponsors to that. Local state golf tournament on a local course, and like we mentioned, they're all played or filmed at the same two golf courses in Vancouver. One's in, I think, Vancouver, one's in Surrey, which is the same location for the hockey team, but they're all like Vancouver area. I don't know. Did you notice any other like random ones like that? I didn't I didn't even think about Volkswagen driving into the TV.
Yeah, that's more of like that's more product placement, I'd say. But like at the same time, it's like, was it really because of how like beat up the car was? Like you would think if it was actual product placement, it would have been like a nice car. But no, I mean the other ones you mentioned them, Red Lobster, and Sizzler are featured in a prominent and really kind of funny way. I still tell people that you want to go down Sizzler, catch the grub.
Want to catch a grub, Shooter?
Those are all that I noticed. I paid attention to the golf brands. TaylorMade was an interesting one because they were a really young company at the time. Really just kind of getting their start. And it's an older logo. Like you can tell it's one of their first logos. It's not the logo that you see today or would be familiar with today. And then like O'Doul's shows up on the TV tower and things like that. But I think you hit them all.
And that's a lot more than I thought there were, because like we're talking about, the only one that really stood out to me is Subway. And it sounds like from what we were talking about before and what you had found from the fan reaction early on is I feel like it just sat through a Subway commercial. But Subway, so I time-stamped it. And this is why I think they're a product placement. We sort of jump into this and we'll come back to what the Subway sponsorship elements were in the film fictionally, but the product integration into the film. So they're the first brand that actually shows up. They come in at, so the timestamp I had was 5 minutes and 16 seconds into the movie when his girlfriend is leaving the place that they leave in after he gets cut from the junior hockey team that the Waterbury Wolverines is trying out for. He's holding a Subway bag and he says, "Oh, I have a friend from high school that works there. Hooked us up with extra meatballs." I didn't remember that at all, but there's that plug. And then there's signage on the TV tower like 40 minutes in. And then the ad that seems to have stood out to everybody intentionally is exactly at the 1 hour mark, on the nose. So he's meeting with grandma and they play the ad and it's 1:00:00, like right at the hour mark, start of the third act. Subway is right there. And I think that might be why it stands out to people, because it is the shift from he gets in the fight with Bob Barker. He gets kicked off the tour for 30 days. And then he comes back going into the tour championship. And so it's going into the final third of the movie. That's, the big reveal.
It's like boom, Subway right in your face.
Right in your face, right at that point, right exactly at the hour mark of an hour and a half movie. So there's no way that just happened circumstantially. And I don't know anybody at Subway that would have worked there then that could talk about that. And even if they did do something contractually, they wouldn't say that. But it's not circumstantial that it was edited so that it appeared exactly at 1 hour into the film. So that's clearly something they worked out. I'm assuming with the editors had to make sure that it showed up contractually right at that point in the film.
Probably.
And they just edited around it.
Yeah. Well, it runs like a perfect 30-second spot too. Like it's,
Well, good segue into, I think let's do false market value here, because we've already done a lot of background work into what the ad rates were then and now, and how to calculate golf sponsorships and where the recognition typically happens. And again, not to plug a previous podcast, but if you want to go into sort of the background of how we arrived at our conclusion, but we've already built the model for pro golf sponsorship and what we think the values were then and now. And it happened in the same year. So that makes it easier. The only difference is we recorded the last one in 23 and this one we're doing in 24. So aside from that, it's pretty much the same thing. So this should be pretty simple to go through. And I put the assets in here too. So let's do false market value. So went through a couple different things here. I'm going to start with let's start with the purses. So this is what Shooter takes home. And I went through, they don't show every single one, other than there's that point in the film where he gets back in his beat up car and there's a whole stack of checks that are in there. So I don't know how far along he is before he gets suspended, but the first tournament's the AT&T Invitational. So Shooter wins $210,000, and then Happy Gilmore's in last place with $2,500. I didn't see anything for the Michelin Invitational. So the Dallas, I think it's the Dallas Open, has, well, first of all, it doesn't have a title sponsor, which I found interesting, but that was a $200,000 purse to the winner for Shooter McGavin, won that, and then Happy took home $4,800. The Visa one, unclear which Shooter had, but I'm guessing it's going to be around the same amount. And then for Happy Gilmore at the Visa Everglades Open, took home $12,600. And then the next check we see is like 1,700 because he finishes last. And then the Pro-Am happens where they don't really say if he made any money other than he gets fined. And then he gets kicked off the tour for 30 days. And then he comes back at the tour championship, more or less. So I'm guessing they say at the beginning of the film, and this gets into just some more just sort of general values to talk about here. So his grandmother's total debt is $270,000 that he has to earn in 90 days. And he initially starts hustling people at the local Waterbury golf course, trying to outdrive them. Yeah. But they say she has 90 days to pay it back. And so then they're like, oh, well, why don't you join the professional golfing tour, or at least try out because you've got this killer drive. And then he decides that's going to be his path to earn $270,000 in 90 days. And so I'm presuming that he only plays 60 days on the tour once he makes it, and then he's off for 30, and then it's the tour championship, which is the 4-day event at the end of the film.
Yeah.
So the Pro-Am is pretty much the turning point, which they have 60 days in. So I guess my question for you before we start getting into, whether that those values make sense is, first of all, in 1996, was it realistic that Happy, with the skill level he has, could he conceivably place at the bottom rung of all those golfers, make 270,000 if nothing else happened? Like if he just played through at the end of 90 days, would he have 270,000 at that point? And then also, if you get suspended for 30 days, could he come back and make that? And I don't know. It just, the whole thing seems implausible to me that he could.
That's one of those details that you're like, okay, you guys missed on this one, because if you don't make a cut in a professional tournament, you're not making money, first of all. And I don't think Happy had the skills to make a cut.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's the way that I look at that. I'm like, okay, they didn't make the cut on this one, which I think is probably why they hired the golf consultant to come in and be like, how do we make this somewhat believable? And that was probably the one thing that they had to push back on. Like, no, there's no cuts in these tournaments. Like, this is a different tour. And the purses, like, at the time make sense. Like, it has the size of the purse. Like, that lines up pretty well.
So Shooter would take home, whoever won those tournaments would take home 200. I know now it's
200, 250, 300, but now you add a zero to that and you're closer. But obviously a lot's changed since 96. But yeah, that was the one thing that I'm like, okay, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're somehow making a cut and then coming in last place. Then you would make a little bit of money. But I love the line that, well, what does last place make? And he's like, $2,500. Like, all right, sweet, either way I'm gonna make some money.
Well, all right, so let's do this now. And I was going to ask you this later on, but this is a good time to do it. Can you explain to me the Waterbury Open leaderboard at the end? So Happy's leading in the local amateur tournament that gets him on the tour. So this is what I don't understand. On the leaderboard in the background, on the front nine, here's his scorecard. It's 1 2 1 2 3 2 2 0 1. And then on the back nine, it's 2 3 5 6 5 5 6 6, and then the last hole's a 5, if you count all the strokes.
Okay.
So explain to me, how is he winning that tournament, first of all, and how does that get him on the tour? Because the way that so based on what you just said, I'm wondering, did they bring in the golf consultant after they filmed some of these scenes? Because he would have had to have been, that basically means he hasn't hit par on any of the 18 holes that he played, and then his back nine is worse than his front nine. So I just don't understand, how would he have won with that leaderboard? With that scorecard?
I'm looking at it right now. Well, yeah, because I'm looking at it and it shows, so the numbers are red, right?
Okay.
So a red number on that leaderboard would say how many under par they are. So that's what it's showing. So on the first hole, he bogeys it, which he doesn't, because you know he takes like 6 strokes around the first hole.
It doesn't line up with how they film it. Okay.
So he probably has a 7 or an 8 on the first hole. So that doesn't
and he
add
gets
up.
better the longer he plays, and it looks like his score gets worse.
Yeah. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when I'm looking at it, because from 4 to 5, he goes from 2 over to 3 under.
Okay.
Which you could conceive was the hole in one on the par 4, but that's still only 3 under par, so he would go to 1 under.
And that's what I couldn't tell watching it. Is he over or under on this? Because it looks like he's over par on every single hole. So, I mean, is he in the
Well, then you go
hundreds at
from
the
like
end of this?
a red 5 to a black 4. Yeah, I'm looking at this. It doesn't make any sense. You're
Well,
right.
and- okay, so my question for you is the 6 red? Because that means that he had 3, I believe they call it an ostrich in golf, where you're 6 under par, which is like impossible. And he has,
If you're playing a par, the only way there's a hole 1 on a par 7, then I don't know of a par
Right,
7 that
right.
exists.
So I just had some questions about the leaderboard. I'm like, this leaderboard,
No, it makes no sense. And
yeah,
he was apparently leading by 4 strokes going into the last hole,
and barely ekes it
that
out.
looks like it's right on the leaderboard, which is funny.
It? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, and it certainly doesn't line up with the way that they shoot that. But okay, I was curious to know your take on the leaderboard.
It is nice to see a young Will Zalatoris in the film, though. It's not actually Will Zalatoris, but he Happy Gilmore's caddy. He looks just like Will Zalatoris, who's a PGA Tour player.
I have a question about the caddy. When it comes to Subway sponsorship, we'll get to that one. All right, so I just want to talk about Grandma's house real quick, and this is going to get super nerdy here for folks that just want to plus 10 or whatever and skip ahead to where we start to break down the Subway thing. But this is something that I find interesting, and I'm curious to know your take on this too, Joe. So, Grandma's house. So the address for the house that's in the film is in Vancouver, British Columbia. So in 1989, that house was worth, so they don't have 1995 or 96, but in 1989, that house was worth 720,000 Canadian. And the exchange rate on average, over time is about 74% to the US dollar. But anyway, in Canadian dollars, it was worth 720,000. In 2019, that house is worth 5.57 million. And so, so the tax rate currently, and I couldn't go back any farther than a few years on this, at least as far as public information is concerned, but the tax rate in Vancouver is $1.74 per every $1,000 worth of home value. So in 1989, even with penalties and interest, if she hadn't paid her taxes for 12 years, and his grandma doesn't have any income because she says, I didn't have any money, so I never paid my taxes.
Yeah.
But her tax bill, even without penalties and interest, would be about $12,500. So the fact that over 10 years it would accrue to $270,000 doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless she had a bunch of taxes she didn't pay from income in her career before that. But Smigle's IRS agent shows up and says it's $270,000 over 10 years that she owes in back taxes. But I mean, the penalties and interest doesn't even make sense with a $12,500 tax bill.
It's crazy interest rate or something.
Well, now that house is worth almost $5.6 million. So now per year, it's about $9,700 a year that they pay in taxes on that house based on its present value.
So you're still not even close.
I mean, I think it'd be more plausible now if you didn't pay your taxes for 10 years with penalty and interest that maybe you could get to 200,000 because, I mean, you're paying in taxes, assuming that rate doesn't increase over time or your home value doesn't increase. If everything stayed consistent, it'd be about $100,000 you'd owe in taxes over a decade.
We'll say she was a stock magnate, and she didn't pay her capital gains taxes when she pulled her money out of the stock market.
Yeah,
how about
something.
that?
Yeah, there has to be something else other than the house there because I don't get how she's $270,000 in debt. But okay.
She's a gambler. She spent too much time down by you, Ross, in Vegas, and she had some markers she needed to pay
She's
too.
hitting up the Vancouver Surrey casinos. That's her pastime.
Hey, Canadians love Vegas, Ross. Anytime I'm down there and it's a Canadian team playing the Knights, it's half the arena's Canadians. So it's they love Vegas.
All right, so Grandma may or may not have a gambling problem. The Subway sponsorship. So they filmed the ad with Happy, use the name, image, likeness in the ad. That seems to be the one that has the most recognition. And it's the one where if you go on YouTube, you can just find that 30 seconds for the Subway ad.
Yeah.
But they give him a t-shirt. He wears underneath like a long sleeve shirt in a couple of the rounds in the last 4 rounds during the tour championship. And then one of them, he wears a polo shirt that has the Subway logo over the left front breast.
They had him class it up a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. And then, the untucked polo shirt. And then the bag side paddle on his golf bag has Subway on it too.
Yeah.
And so the way to look at this, and we did this for Tin Cup, and this is going to be pretty quick to go through here. So the way that the exposure is measured for that depends on where the recognition is going to happen on his person. And so he doesn't wear a hat other than his bees hat, but his caddy does. And so usually if a golfer wears a hat, it has the second most exposure aside from the bag side panel. So the hat's about 390 seconds a day in a major tour event like that. The shirt's 300 seconds per day worth of exposure. I mean, broadcast exposure. The bag side panel is about 500 seconds a day. Then the other ones that we talked about where recognition typically occurs, and now there's a new one. I suppose you could consider like the ninth recognition where it's on the, you mentioned when we were doing Tin Cup that there's a Nike swoosh on the back shoulder now. So when they turn after they swing or they drive, that you can see that prominently, in the screen. But the other locations are typically the left sleeve, the right sleeve, the side of whatever headwear they have, whether that's a visor or a hat, the back of the hat, and then the yoke, which is the back of the shirt. And those gradually go down in, levels of exposure because depending on, where they typically film a golfer when they're performing in the tournament depends on how much recognition you actually get. So in this case, I would say Subway is recognized as his primary sponsor. It seems like it's in the right place. So it's the shirt, it's the bag side panel. The shirt is the left, like you said, the classed up polo shirt. It's on the left breast, and then he just has a t-shirt with the Subway logo on it. And then his caddy has the hat. Now,
I think that's the wild card, Ross, is when I was watching this, because Shooter's caddy also wears a Top Flight hat.
Right.
And in professional golf now, sometimes the caddy will have the same sponsors as the player, and sometimes they don't. And it depends on the prominence of the caddy. So like Scotty Scheffler's caddy's Ted Scott. And he's been on the tour forever. And so people know who Ted Scott is. And so companies will sign sponsorship deals directly with Ted Scott.
Okay.
Right. And so I thought it was interesting that the sponsorship deals in this particular, and this may be the way it was in '96, I don't know, that the sponsorship deals were also applied to the caddy.
So just thinking out loud here, the caddy characters, obviously, okay, so I know we said no spoiler alerts, but, spoiler alert, his caddy is a person experiencing homelessness that's trying to clean his windshield at the start of the movie. And so he needs to bring his own caddy on tour, which he doesn't know. So he just grabs the person who was trying to clean his windshield and like puts him on, who in real life is one of Adam Sandler's best friends, the actor is. But all right, so his caddy is taking a shower at one point in the water hazard.
Yeah.
Kevin Nealon puts down a quarter as a marker.
Yep.
When they're putting and he picks up the quarter and steals it. He uses a cracker.
I like the cracker tournament. On the last one.
The cracker kills me. But my thinking is I think the hat is supposed to be for Happy, and Happy gave it to his caddy.
Yeah,
and so
I believe that.
Yeah. So my question for you is, do you think a caddy wearing a Subway logo on a cap while Happy is playing, do you think that would have more or less or about the same amount of exposure as Happy? I have my opinion, but I'm curious what you think.
I would say a little bit less than if Happy was wearing it, because they're not interviewing the caddy after the round. They're not, you're not getting that extra exposure that's outside of the ropes. But during the event, the caddy's there prominent front and center. You see them.
Okay.
I mean, you have guys doing bag sponsorships. The player's not carrying his own bag.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let's say instead of 390 seconds a day, let's just say it's 300. Make it easy.
Yeah. You're going to miss out on the post-round stuff, right?
Right, because he's not going to be interviewed after the round. Okay, yeah, so he loses, that, whatever, 30 to 90 seconds.
Yeah. You're probably not getting as many close-ups on TV either. Like, they're not zooming in on the caddy, that type of stuff. But he's there. He's standing next to him every single shot.
Yeah, okay. Well, the movie was filmed between... I agree with you, first of all. And then the movie was filmed between June and September in 1995, actually, but released in 96. And so we can use the same time frame they filmed Tin Cup. So the rate we used for 1995 during a broadcast, a televised broadcast for a tour event was $28,000 was the rate that we used. Subway's the sponsor for all 4 days of that event. And we can come back to whether that was a good decision or not when we get into like the whole know your audience section, which we can go through.
Yeah.
But the rate now, so in 2024, broadcast rates for a 30-second spot. So that $28,000 is for a 30-second spot or a CP30. So the CP30 for 2024 increased about 7.5% from last year. At least that's the current projection. So that would make the rate for 2024 about $95,000, little bit less. But if Subway received recognition on the hat, the shirt, and the bag side paddle, knowing that the caddy's wearing the hat and it's not getting as much exposure, in 1995, that sponsorship in terms of exposure would have been worth 4.1 and change million over those 4 days, just from those 3 locations based on present value ad rates at the time. In 2024, using the substantially higher broadcast rates for those tournaments, assuming all the same things for the total amount of exposure, like if that tournament was played now and Happy were playing in it, it would be about $13.9 million total exposure. So what we know is, from what Julie Bowen says, after they film the ad, he goes to his grandma, grabs her from the retirement home and takes her back to her place and says, the best thing about this is now that we've done this ad, I've got the $270,000 to buy your house back.
Yeah.
But all he has at auction is 270,000. So I'm guessing Subway, just based on some of those previous checks that he won, and he was winning those low dollar amounts, and I don't know how many actual tournaments he played in, but say it was like 10 at like $2,500, something like that. He probably, I'm guessing that sponsorship paid value, what Subway actually paid to do that just for the final championship event and do the ad, was around $250,000. And they got almost $4 million worth of exposure
out of it
from Happy in the tournament, including from whatever banner they had on that TV stand. When the TV stand falls down, and I didn't notice this until I watched it this time, because the first thing I thought is, why would Subway put their banner in real life on a prop that falls down and like is a key moment in the movie at the end of the film? And it's because it's actually used.
Yeah, his ball rolls over it. Yeah.
Ball rolls over it. Yeah. And so it's like broadside shot of Subway's logo as the ball goes by. It's beautiful. And it's involved in his, pivotal putting moment. But anyway, figure they're getting, $4.1 million for a $250,000 investment for it.
Yeah.
But now that brings us into a newer category we introduced with the Wayne's World episode, which is called What Would Noah Vanderhoff Do? So Noah Vanderhoff, for those of you who aren't familiar, haven't listened to the Wayne's World podcast yet, Noah Vanderhoff is the character that owns Noah's Arcade in the film Wayne's World, and he is the guy that doesn't care at all who his audience is. He's just sort of a professional salesman. He's trying to get people into his arcade, basically, right?
Yep.
And so Noah Vanderhoff, in the context that we're using it here, is sort of an amalgam of every salesperson you've ever known and all their different sales tactics sort of like mashed into one. And it is in Wayne's World too. So I guess you could say they're kind of the heavy in a film like this, but the heavy in this film is Shooter McGavin.
Yep.
Shooter McGavin, aside from engaging some illegal activities to basically, injure or take Happy out.
That was Rory McIlroy. He hired the cops to arrest Scotty Scheffler at the PGA Championship, I think.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. which
it was an inside job. Shooter called him to throw Scheffler off. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, that's great. So yeah, in this case, the Noah Vanderhoff, the salesperson in this, is the publicist played by Julie Bowen.
Absolutely.
And so I just have a bunch of questions, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but Julie Bowen. So my questions for you, and just, I don't know, the audience in general, for posterity, what does Julie Bowen's publicist get for staking her name on a rookie wild card bad boy golfer that is an amateur and it's his first tour? She makes a deal with the tour to, help train him or get him into TV shape. Why did she wait 60 days to find him a sponsor? Because he was pretty much an immediate hit on the tour, because, Doug, the person who manages the tour, Doug says, we're getting phones ringing off the hook wanting to see more Happy Gilmore on the tour. So he's getting more TV time. It's just, so first of all, what is she thinking? What does she see in him that thinking about the Vanderhoff aspect of it, where she sees that as an opportunity, and I'm gonna turn Happy Gilmore into a sensation more than he already is. I can work with that.
I think I look at it from like a publicist line of view, and she's working for the tour, right? So her charge
is she working for the tour? That's
she's
what
working for the tour. Yeah. So she's the public relations person for the tour.
Okay.
Right. So that makes a little bit more sense on why she didn't find him a sponsor specifically, but was working to find in more sponsors for the tour itself. Because when he's playing his first tournament and you hear him going on the blue streak in the background on the TV, which is way funny. Next time you watch it, pay attention to the dialogue in the TV in the background, because some of the stuff he says is freaking hilarious. And spending as much time in hockey as I have, it's like that is a hockey player mouth right there. And I love it. It's hilarious. And they pause at the perfect times and things come on. But she says,
it's the Shoresy tirade.
Yeah, right? It's so funny. Yeah. It's useful profanity, as I put it.
Kind of like what we use in this podcast sometimes.
Exactly. Useful profanity. But in that scene, Doug says, hey, get Virginia in here to put a press release about Happy getting kicked off the tour. And then she kind of has to sell Happy on, be like, hey, no. She says, like, golf has been waiting for a working class hero that's a little rough around the edges. And then she says, I'll work with him on that. Yep. But this is going to attract a whole new audience. And then she's the one that says, hey, I just got a call from the Dallas Open and their phone's been ringing off the hook for people that want to see Happy. Right. They just sold out, right? And then Doug's like, oh, okay, maybe. And then later, Doug's walking across the bridge with Happy and saying, yeah, we're doing great and I'm coming around and everybody seems to be coming around. And then Shooter has this freak out moment. Well, I'm not, Doug. So I think that her charge was like, I need to grow the tour. I want more fans coming in here. I want a different sponsorship base of people who are coming. We've had the same sponsors. It's the AT&Ts, it's the Visa, it's the people that you see on those checks and those title sponsors. And she's going, okay, they're tapped out. We need to bring in new money, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. So you can see the wheels turning after the Bob Barker fight, and they're sitting in the subway, which is, the big placement in the center of the film, or I guess 2/3 of the way through the film at a very pivotal moment. So Julie Bowen, Virginia, you see the wheels turning, and the next thing you see is Happy Gilmore has a sponsorship with Subway.
Yeah.
So that was my question for you. Did she sell that for Happy, or did she hook him up with Subway to help him out? And she's using that to elevate all the other brands, the younger, youthful brands that Doug talks about, on the rest of the tour. And then why is the publicist helping out the sponsorship folks to help bring brands in for the tour? Because even in 1995, 96, they would have someone that just managed a sponsorship program. Yeah. Right. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, no. It doesn't really add up. But you could think that she's going to venture out on her own. She's going to start a sponsorship valuation company and start selling sponsorships for people. There you go. It's the start of her new business.
She's an entrepreneur.
There we go.
Right, making her name for herself on the tour, and then she's branching out. All right.
I'm going to be an agent. I'm going to be Happy's agent. Yeah.
Which she, aside from the conflict of interest there,
right,
would make a lot of sense. But that seems like that would be a career path, right? When we're talking about like Noah Vanderhoff. So the lesson there is, instead of kicking off a popular person that has antics, would there be, okay, so let's just go through the antics real quick, because talk about Happy as a sponsorable property, Happy Gilmore, the athlete.
Yeah.
So on-course antics include bull dance. He tries to do a beer bong with a fan, grabs the camera and starts yelling at it like you said, like a hockey player. I can't remember the term you used, but the strategic,
useful profanity.
Useful profanity. Dives into the water hazard to get his ball back, throws his clubs when he hits a shot he doesn't like. He autographs 2 different women's chests after during or after one of the tournaments. Rampant use of profanity laced tirades. Doesn't wear proper attire, which apparently is an Adam Sandler thing too. There's actually something called the Adam Sandler style now, which is baggy pants and oversized t-shirts. Yeah, and he's taking ownership of it. He's like, it took me 20 years to get to the point where people recognize my style, but I'm finally accepted. So he's got a Happy Tough fan club. Yep. And there's a sign in the background off of, I don't know, one of the greens in one of the tournaments there. In courses, making noise or cheering during the actual tournament itself, and instead of being quiet, at one point he's running along the side, which is honestly my favorite scene in the movie, is where he's running along,
getting everybody going.
Oh, that shot is awesome. But credit to Doug, who actually directed the film. But anyway, he's kind of he seems like he's a difficult property to sponsor because of his unpredictability, but that is what Julie Bowen recognizes. And so she says, like you said, let's work with him, and I'm going to use this to gain a whole new audience for professional golf and the tour. And Doug even mentions like his driving traffic to the on-site events. So like we're attracting new fans that are coming out and watching the tournaments. It's the most successful we've ever been. So we're just going to suspend him. We're not going to kick him off the tour, much to the chagrin of Shooter McGavin. But would that happen? And again, the question for the Noah Vanderhoff character is, would that type of sales strategy work in real life? Would a publicist work in tandem with, say, their sponsorship person or the tour to work with a problematic golfer if it raised and elevated the overall sport and generated more money for the tour? I would say yes. I'd say yes as
well. I think you've actually seen it too. I mean, you've got guys like Jason Duffner. We talked about that on the Tin Cuff episode as well, where he's sponsored by Dude Wipes, and it's these like random weird sponsors that show up that are like, you know, these guys that may be a little disgraced, or I mean, I think in the next couple of years you're going to see some interesting things happen with these guys that are on Live, because they have a few players on Live that don't get a lot of things that have, like, they don't get a lot of media or anything, but they got some young guys that came up and signed early on. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there's one that'll be playing in the US Open, and I think after that, he's like a 19-year-old Chilean kid, right? Took the money to go play in Live so he could be a pro, and he's been playing all these other events to get enough world ranking points so he can play in the US Open. And that somebody like that is perfect, because the big brands aren't going to recognize him. They're not necessarily going to want to go where the Live stuff is going on, because there's still the publicity around that. But somebody may say, well, let's take a chance on this guy. And maybe it's a new golf brand. Maybe it's I don't know.
So it's a good transition into what we had talked about as sort of being the purpose of this, since we sort of organically went into it, is know your audience, which is a new category we started specifically for this podcast, and we're formalizing it. So know your audience. All right. As it relates to that, so we touched on all of the things that make Happy who he is, and that this could happen in real life, right? Like the real Noah Vanderhoff would probably strategically, that publicist would follow the exact strategy that she did. And like you said, there's real life analogs where that's actually happened. So now my question is, I found a source online. I did some research, and this is unconfirmed. I couldn't find it, but Subway's target demographic, as recently as 2011, and they don't have anything on their site about this now, but their demographic in 2011 was males age 16 to 39. That's their target demo. So given everything that we just talked about with Happy Gilmore, the strategy behind it, elevating all the other brands, getting more youthful sponsors in, and this was my question when we were texting about this, why is it Subway? Why is Subway there? Why does she go, you know what? This guy's eating Subway sandwiches and lives by it. We're going to give him a, eat Subway for free card in recognition. And Subway is going to tie into this problematic rookie golfer, untested, unpredictable, 2/3 of the way through the tournament season, going into one tournament event. For $250,000, that seems like a risk. If those numbers are correct, why is it Subway? I mean, why is Subway the one that's there? What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think you could add another piece to Subway's demographic. It's not your typical stuffy golfer who was a golf fan in '96, right? It's not your country club member. It's not your banker. It's not your insurance agent. It's these blue collar workers, and that's who Happy represents. So I think that absolutely fits. Makes sense. It's right. You're right. It is a risk, but one of my favorite lines is when Vern Lundquist is talking about, I saw a guy on the parking lot wearing one of those beer dispensing hats, and it's his caddy that's wearing it, which is, I love that. It's so funny.
With a couple of buds.
And they're showing the tailgating outside the course and the guys with the noisemakers and stuff. And it's like, you think about like Subway's like, okay, that was where I went in high school. Like, that's what I did. Like, that's where you went for lunch in high school. And so it's the blue collar. I need to run and grab something really quick. And so I think as far as audience goes, it makes a ton of sense.
Okay. The question to me was, if that demographic is real, even back in 1995, knowing this is early on in Subway sponsorship days. So that was one of the other things that I saw that came up in the research was Subway's first official sponsorship of a fictional golfer in a comedy.
Sponsorship. Yeah. Well, like if they're trying to attract golfers, no, it's an absolute miss.
Right.
But they're trying to attract Happy's fans, not golfers, right?
Right. So they sponsor Happy to reach the crowd he's bringing to a golf event, but not any of the people that would typically go to a PGA Tour event.
Which is why you would think like, okay, the big spend's on Happy, and then, okay, we'll buy a little bit of signage at the actual tournament, and maybe we grab, half a dozen people that see that,
Okay. So in terms of, going back to know your audience. So if that is Subway's strategy, do you think that this, from their perspective, I mean, obviously in terms of exposure value, it is, but it's not just exposure value. It's, are you tying in the audience? Are you creating some sort of congruity between who Happy is, who his fans are, and what Subway represents? Do you think those people translated into customers for Subway for, their lunch breaks, if they're working like random shifts or something, because, they're like the blue collar construction crowd, like they work, odd shifts. They probably created a lunch crowd around the local Subway. If you look at Subway's history around that time, their first sponsorship was around Indy racing. So seems like that demographic that Happy's reaching is also an Indy racing demographic. So seems to make sense that Subway would have been targeting in 1995, 1996, that crowd to come in and, at least while their stores are open, generate some sort of, early to mid-afternoon lunch business, depending on, if they're shift workers, when they would typically go have lunch. Do you think this was successful for Subway, just fictionally and then in real life too?
I think fictionally, yeah. I would say yes, unless they're attracting more people that they already were getting in other ways. Then it's like, okay, you just spent a bunch of money to talk to the customers you already had, right?
Yeah.
I think yes, they did. It would be successful for them. I'm hoping so. There's rumors of a Happy Gilmore 2.
Yeah.
And there's so many, like, I think it's so interesting when they start talking about, okay, we're going to do a number 2 for a movie that's 30 years old. Like, how do you cover everything that's happened in 30 years?
Yeah.
Is it Happy's son? Is it, is it a kid, or does it get into, okay, the tour championship that Happy won was a fluke? And yeah, so Chris McDonald has actually put tweets out about this before, that Happy's tour championship was a fluke, and so I'm curious which direction they'll go in on that, and if it answers any of these questions.
So the PGA Tour official Twitter account teased that Tiger Woods is in the movie too. Yeah, and the disruption that we talked about at the start in 1996 for pro golf, the person who did that, the athlete that did the Happy Gilmore, Roy McIlroy disruption that changed the demographics of the people that follow pro golf, was Tiger Woods. And so now he's in Happy Gilmore too.
Yep.
Which is crazy.
It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see when or if it actually does come out, but I think it'll answer a lot of the questions we just brought up.
Well, while we're talking about IRL counterparts, if you want to call it that, so there's a golfer last fall named Landon Gilmore that signed with Ball State, won a driving championship as an amateur in high school, as a high school golfer, and earned the nickname Happy. So Happy Gilmore is a real golfer, signed to Ball State. Adam Sandler gave him a shout out and said, go get him, rooting for you. And, the real Happy Gilmore said, my life is complete now. And they're, tweeting back and forth. And then Chris McDonald chimes in and he says, hey, Subway, this looks like a name, image, likeness partnership opportunity for you.
You've been waiting for this.
Chris McDonald's tweet, which is awesome that he has that sort of, industrial knowledge. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but he seems like he's a legit golfer, right? Like the way he plays. But there's a real Happy Gilmore right now playing golf, and knowing that, in your role at Utah, you have some knowledge of the NIL deals that are happening with the athletes on campus.
Yeah.
Would Subway make sense now for the real Happy Gilmore, an 18-year-old at Ball State, as an NIL opportunity?
Yeah. NIL is so interesting because Ball State's not a big school.
Right.
I mean, it's rare for a college kid to go pro. Like it doesn't happen very often. The PGA's made it a little bit easier with their PGAU program and stuff, but like the hype that he's getting around it, and like Christopher McDonald, it looks like Adam Sandler gave him a shout out. Like, yeah, it absolutely would make sense for Subway to say, hey, here's a $50,000 NIL deal, throw out a couple social media posts, and we call it a day.
Yeah, and it seems like Subway now, with its revised fresh fit celebrity endorsement focused on athletic lifestyles.
Yeah.
This Happy Gilmore, this 18-year-old golfer, seems like he'd be a better fit than, say, the 22-year-old fictional Happy Gilmore in 1995.
I think so.
This seems like it lines up with what they're trying to do now from a brand perspective. So I think
if they really leaned into it and like put him in commercials with Steph Curry and like, you know, Steph Curry's a big golfer.
Yep.
And people would see him and then they'd start to recognize who he is. I mean, that's the hardest thing with NIL when you're looking at like professional athlete deals. There's guys that play in the NBA that don't have deals. There's guys that play professional golf that aren't getting TV commercials and things like that. There's NHL players you've never heard of that are, you know, playing 15, 20 minutes a night and you don't know what their name is. And so you look at a college kid at Ball State and you go, okay, it doesn't make sense for Subway to invest a ton of money, get him in commercials with guys like Steph Curry and hope that people make the connection to a movie that's 30 years old.
Right. Despite his popularity and the rewatchability and all that stuff. Yeah.
If he shows up next to Adam Sandler wearing a Boston Bruins jersey and like, you know, they do a whole thing around it. Right. Okay, great.
Right. That would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So assuming on the integration can be executed effectively, it might make sense for Subway to do that. Go figure, the villain of the film, Shooter McGavin, comes in with potential, you know, Vanderhoff salesmanship tactic, helping out an 18-year-old golfer get a deal with Subway, which I think is pretty ironic and interesting that he stepped in to do that. But happy to see that Christopher McDonald stepped in to help him out. But just want to touch on missed opportunities real quick.
I've got one big one.
Oh, okay.
But you go ahead.
No, go for it, because we probably have the same one.
This one is something that I just noticed the last time I watched it. And so Shooter's sponsored by Top Flight.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch closely, when he has to hit the ball off of Frankenstein's fat foot in the final scene, the ball is not a Top Flight golf ball.
Yeesh.
I noticed that and was like, oh, that's interesting.
That's pretty huge.
I mean, imagine if Tiger's putt at the Masters that you see over and over and over again, when it rolls and sits right on the lip of the cup and the Nike logo just sits there and then it falls. Imagine if he's putting with a ball that has an Adidas logo on it.
Right. And the ball, the endemic golf sponsorships, like you said, they're loyal to one brand or another. And if they're performing well with it, that's somewhat where they'll sponsor the whole bag, right? Yep. The whole bag and the balls and all their equipment is the same, you know, Titleist brand or TaylorMade or whatever the case is. So not doing that is a pretty big miss. And if they switch up, which I can't remember the golfer that you mentioned switched up.
It was Bubba Watson. Yeah.
Yeah. And used, what was it, hot pink?
It was the Volvic golf balls that he used. They're the super colorful. Yeah.
Yeah. And like didn't make the cut.
Yeah. And so didn't make cuts, couldn't hit the ball, couldn't putt. And then he switched back to Titleist and wins the first tournament he enters.
So, you know, that type of category within professional golf sponsorship is hugely valuable for him not to have that golf ball, which frankly, I didn't notice. And that's,
imagine
LeBron, you're a golf expert, Joe, that you picked up on that. I didn't even think.
I saw that and I had to pause and go back again and be like, that's not a Top Flight ball.
Man, that's a huge one. So the one that I had, similar idea behind it, is the whole Doug and Shooter scene where Shooter's like, I'm not coming around, Doug.
Yeah, right.
So in that scene, he says, we're attracting new youthful sponsors. And at the Masters, or not the Masters, but at the Tour Championship, it's the same sponsors that were there at the start of the film. So
Yeah.
my question I had coming out of that is, so where are all these youthful brands? Who
New
are they?
youthful brands. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you did want to have a youthful brand, if you're calling it a youthful brand in 1995 or 96, who should have been there?
Right.
Like, let's say Subway isn't interested, right? We're happy eats his sandwiches. We'll give them a, eat Subway for life card, but we're not going to attach ourselves to a high risk property.
Yeah.
Who would? Then,
Yeah.
if not Subway? That is, and it's sort of recasting the Subway sponsorship, but the brands that are there, and we listed them at the top, and that's why we make a point to kind of go through that. I mean, the tour sponsors are O'Doul's, Subway, ESPN, Golf Digest, Top Flight, Wilson, Reebok. I mean, Reebok notwithstanding, the rest of them are just typical previous, PGA Tour golf sponsors. So where are the youthful brands?
Yeah, you had TaylorMade in there, and they were new at the time, which was, but I mean, still, that's an endemic brand. It's not anything new. But I mean, I don't know who would be. I mean, like maybe like a Nintendo at the time, like 96. Nintendo's youthful, like that would make a lot of sense.
Well, Happy doesn't wear golf shoes on the course, so the first thing that popped into my head was Vans.
Yeah, there you go.
In 95, 96, because the Vans Warped Tour, I think, started in. Well, I think the Warped Tour started in 93, and I think Vans sponsorship started in 97. Don't hold me to that, but it was mid to late 90s where Vans was a very active sponsor targeting a very specific youthful demographic. So if Happy is attracting those folks, I outfit him with Vans. That seems to make a lot of sense because all he wears is t-shirts and baggy pants and sneakers, boots, whatever on the golf course. That's Vans bread and butter, right? Just put them all in Vans gear. He'll be comfortable and it'll look natural.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I think today, if you did it, the golf bag piece is interesting. I love that they just slapped the Subway logo on the old golf bag that he has.
Which is his grandfather's bag with his old clubs.
Yeah, they just slapped this little Subway logo on the side of it. I love that. That cracked me up. It's not a new bag. It's just, let's just slap the logo on it. But I think
the first set of golf clubs I ever had was a hand-me-down bag.
I remember the purple bag I had with the, I remember it.
It looked exactly like that. They just attached a Subway logo to it.
Like you got so many people trying to enter that market right now. I think that if you fast forward today, like a Vessel or Ghost Golf or one of these kind of newer golf brands would make a ton of sense. Yeah.
So want to go into this category specifically created for you, Joe. We're going to call this rookie mistakes because I liked it better than stupid golf questions. And we'll make this presented by Fairways Relationship Management because you're the expert on golf, but I have a lot of questions about the way golf is portrayed in this movie. For it being a golf film, I saw something online. Yeah, there's a lot of people offering opinions and blogs, and there's a venture capital blog that's talking about this movie and sponsorship, and there's stuff out there if you want to go read all that stuff. It's entertaining, but there was one that said this is more of a hockey film that features golf than it is a golf film per se. Yeah, and given the level of stupid golf questions I had, or as we're calling them, rookie mistakes, I think there's a few. I think that holds water, that theory anyway. I don't know how you feel about it, but I've got a few questions I was going to run through with you as the expert golf coach.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I love it.
Okay. So how useful is a 400 plus yard drive in golf in real life?
It can be extremely useful if you can find it in the middle of the fairway every time.
Okay.
But guys who hit it that long, there's guys on tours like Tony Finau, he can hit it for 400, 420 if he wants to, but he doesn't because he knows that the dispersion rate's going to go crazy, right?
Right. Well,
and so if you can't find your drive, you just added a stroke. So take a little off, make sure it's going to be in the middle of the fairway. And
how many courses in the United States or abroad that these tournaments host events at would have a hole where a 400 yard drive would be useful? Because at the Waterbury Open, for example, he drives it right under the green.
Yeah.
He couldn't do that at any.
If you can drive the green every hole, that's super useful.
But Tony Finau would just drive the. Yeah.
It's not really
no challenge.
Yeah. Physics still exist. And so, that doesn't really work. Okay. But that's one of the weird conversations happening in golf right now with the whole golf ball rollback, the bifurcation. The pros are going to play with different golf balls than amateurs are. And there's they keep lengthening golf courses Like, I'm actually headed out to South Carolina next week to play the ocean course at Kiowa. They played the PGA Championship there in 2012 and again in 22, I think, when Phil Mickelson won it.
Awesome.
And people were freaking out because that course can play at 8,000 yards, which is crazy. A normal PGA Tour course is usually around 7,000, 7,200 yards.
Okay.
And so you're playing,
par
so they just keep lengthening things. There's par fives that are 600 plus yards now. Par fours are playing almost 500 yards. But the problem is that golfers just keep getting stronger, and they just keep hitting the ball further. They keep hitting it more accurately, and it's not an equipment issue. It's people are adapting to it. They're building their bodies. They're building their golf swings to do that. It's just like a weird argument. Like, things are always going to evolve and get better. Yeah. And so to say, okay, we need to change the equipment and make people worse at golf, like, it's already hard enough. Yeah. Why do that to people?
Why add additional handicaps, right? I mean, for a sport like the NBA, you move back the 3-point line because they just became more accurate and practice more,
and then Steph Curry shows up and just shoots from half court and makes it, whatever.
Right. How far are you going to move the line back, right?
Exactly.
And now there's teenage basketball players that can do that. So
you just embrace the change, and it's a different way to play the game.
Well, and with the technology in terms of equipment available to them too, I'm sure, like you're talking about the physics of it, there's probably ways to cheat the physics now.
It's the physics of golf that interests me, Ross. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I love it.
No, there's I'm actually working with a company out here to put on a golf tournament down in St. George, kind of a best of Utah thing with all the men's leagues around the state. And their company name is Varden. So Harry Varden kind of revolutionized, first guy to revolutionize golf, first guy to wear knickers. He started to hit the ball up in the air before it was like hitting the ball down on the ground. And so, like, the evolution of golf has been happening forever, ever since it was invented. Right. And it's going to keep happening. And I think it's dumb for people to try to stop it. But for a regular guy like you or me, Ross, like, trying to go hit at 400 yards is a lot of fun, but it's not going to help you at all in scoring.
No. So, another stupid question. What's the rule for diving into a water hazard and retrieving your ball? Like, is there a rule on a golf course against that?
No, but I wouldn't do it since it's mostly like reclaimed water out there. It's not nice. And if you're drunk enough, you'll see people drive their carts into the pond.
Okay. But so do you lose? I know you lose a stroke if you hit the water hazard and you have to do a drop, but like, what's the value of jumping into
there's no value because you had to take a drop anyway, right? Yeah. So you can play your ball out of a hazard. You'll see the guys take their shirts off and hit it so they don't get all muddy and stuff, right? Take their shoes off and stand down there so they don't have to take the one stroke penalty. But the way Happy did it makes no sense. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I mean, they do that at the end of 10 Cup after the legendary 12 from Roy McIlroy. Yeah, they dive in to try and find the ball. Yeah. But if you were actually playing, you still get the stroke. You lose a stroke anyway if you go. What's the point? I didn't understand that. So again, stupid question.
Comedic value. Yeah.
Well, and so Chubb says something to. This is another one. When Chubbs is teaching Happy how to putt after he's already played however many tournament events at the mini putt golf place, he says, "This isn't hockey. You can't play with raw emotion." Is that actually true?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the guys on tour right now who has actually talked a lot about it is Wyndham Clark. He was on a episode of Full Swing, and if you want some insight into that, that's a great watch because he goes into working with a sports psychologist and controlling his emotion on the course and like how that's helped him, led to success. Like, he's Pac-12 player of the year down at Arizona State and like came out onto tour and couldn't touch it. And then he started working with a sports psychologist and like, you're too angry. You need to let go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious if that was actually true. It seems like, emotion is part of any sport that you play. Yeah. And the guys, any pro athlete in any discipline, right?
We started
aggressive.
We started a youth clinic and I was working with a kid and 14 years old and he's just swinging so hard and swinging so fast. And I go, hey, the beautiful thing about golf is no one's trying to tackle you. Right. No one's trying to steal the ball. It's just you, and you can calm down and be calm, and that's going to lead to playing better golf.
All right. Last one. I guess I alluded to this earlier. I was just curious. How is Shooter McGavin's golf game? Because I mean, Happy's got the jokey swing that everyone's tried to model, for years, and pro golfers doing that. The real Happy Gilmore has on his Twitter page, or X now, it says, yes, I can actually do the Happy Gilmore swing. And Chris McDonald's trying to do it at the end as Shooter McGavin. But
yeah,
Shooter McGavin's actual golf game seems like it's pro level. Like, he knows what he's doing. Like, how's his game in your opinion?
Honestly, I haven't analyzed this swing from a coach's standpoint, but it seems pretty solid.
Okay. All right. I guess any key takeaways that you would have? I mean, we covered off on a lot of the ones. We talked about knowing your audience. We recast the sponsorship. We dove into what the value was. I mean, obviously, somebody got a ton of value out of it, and they probably, in real life would have attracted a whole new demographic that has nothing to do with golf and everything to do with the golfer. Any other takeaways you had? And then, what else? What's next for you in both disciplines for I think, at Utah? And
I think we kind of hit a lot, but like embracing change and embracing a change and just leaning into who you are as a property or as a brand, it holds a lot of weight. And I think you're starting to see it more and more, especially in golf. The Waste Management Open is leaning into who they are. The Canadian Open's leaning into it. The Masters has always done that. But I think more and more people are picking up on, we don't need to hide from who we are and try to present this image that we aren't really, that like a professional image, right?
Right.
And I think that's just kind of the way the world's moving a little bit, is like, let's just lean into who we are. It's that authenticity. It's let's present what we are. People want to feel real. They don't want this manufactured sponsors, logos, all this crap in our face. They want to hear stories. They want to feel connection to the brands. And so I think embracing that a little bit more and embracing like bringing in new audiences is something that sponsors can do, and something that we're trying to do a little bit at the University of Utah, and in college, it's definitely like a battle between the commercialization and the actual bringing of sponsors. And so trying to find that balance and like, okay, where does our brand fit with others, and where does it make sense? It's an interesting thing to think about, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future, especially with the NIL stuff, and to see how brands will embrace that change.
I'm curious and we've talked about this on this podcast before, and frankly, it's a personal opinion of mine, which is that I think we're getting into the age of influence more so than, engagement or alignment. It's more, how can I align with, in some cases, an individual that, because of their authenticity to their audience, has a real connection to the folks that follow them. And that's where a lot of the dollars being spent is, on these, social media stars that command these huge audiences as influencers in a variety of different areas. I mean, there's an influencer in any particular product category you can think of. I'm curious, are they modeling their sponsorship strategy after pro golfers that have been doing this for 30, 40 years? Or is it just they're both sort of helping each other out? Because it seems like the idea is the authenticity, the real connection doesn't have to be an event. It can be an individual that has that audience now.
Individual sports have been doing it forever, and that's where Nike took off, right? Embrace the change and let's disrupt things, and we're going to sponsor people like Andre Agassi, who's breaking tennis rackets and stuff. Right.
Yeah, you talked about that. Yeah.
So I think that it's definitely something that's happened for a long time. Just more and more brands are starting to jump on board with that, and you've gotten to a point with social media and online where it's getting so saturated, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to reach your audience, where you do have to start getting after these kind of individual things and find out, where can I actually reach my audience now? Because I can't just put it out on the internet and everybody sees it anymore.
Yep. Well, and that, back when sponsorship first became a professional discipline, clutter is, and continues to be a chief concern for sponsors, because it used to be, I don't want my logos slapped all over an arena with everybody else and nobody can see it. And now it's, I don't want my logos mixed in with the stew of recognition for every other brand across social media, and I'm starting to lose value. I need to create a real connection with an audience through someone that actually has that. And I think it's an awesome takeaway for this, because Happy Gilmore, Roy McAvoy, current golfers, on the tour today, all of them offer that sort of authentic integration opportunity. And I think it's funny how much I'm pulling from the pro golfer model when I'm talking to clients about how to build authentic connections to brands and start small and grow it over time. It seems like golf's been doing this for years. And so it's a great takeaway, right? Is
absolutely
authenticity is key to everything, right?
Yeah, it's a crazy world we live in, and everyone's just trying to figure it out, Ross. That's what I'm learning anyway.
All right. Well, anything else you want to mention before we wrap up, Joe?
I don't think so. I've launched a podcast myself, which is a lot of fun. We're calling it Fairways to Fortune. So I'm sitting down and talking to a lot of people about how they've used golf to build their careers and create success in their lives. That should be going live in a little bit here, which is it's been fun to just sit down and talk to people. So
where can they find that? On your website?
So it will be on Spotify, will be on Apple Podcasts and everything. But if you want to follow me on Instagram, just at FairwaysRM, or on LinkedIn, just Joe Canfield on LinkedIn. I'll be posting things about it on both of those platforms.
Awesome. Well, if you're listening in, and we thank you for doing so, make sure to check that out. Joe Canfield, appreciate having you on the program today. Second timer, we'll have to think of one for a third time. Appreciate your perspective on all of this and your expertise in this area, and just being a great guest on our podcast, and really appreciate your support as we build our own audience and following around the business of fictional sponsorship.
Yeah.
So,
hey, if I can talk hockey, golf, sponsorships all day long, every day, I do it, Ross. So I appreciate the advice.
Well, trying to find someone to do Goon 2 with me.
All right, I love that movie. That one's great. We can get into why fighting exists in hockey. That's a good topic too.
The funniest and worst sponsor plug, verbal sponsor mention of all time is in Goon 2.
Yes.
In my opinion. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ross. I appreciate the invite, and we'll do it again soon.
Sounds great. Well, This has been False Market Value. Thanks as always to my producing partner, DJ Cruiser from KSD Studios in Fort Mill, South Carolina. I'm your host, Ross Kennerly, founder of Quant in Las Vegas. We'll see you next time. And remember, don't forget to watch the end credits. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Ross.